What I'd like to do, we have only 1 hour and one topic today, which is some musings about a reorganization of the Manoa campus at the upper level. And I started and I'll finish with this quote. I'm going to show you a chart which is roughly version 8 of something that has been doodled over for probably about 8 weeks or so now, so a couple of months of conversations, mostly with the vice chancellors. I had one good meeting with the faculty. I have many good meetings with the Manoa Faculty Senate SEC, but one good meeting where we focused on this in particular, and then a number of meetings with the deans. And I know it has floated around. I have resisted sending it out electronically just because it has changed certainly every 3 or 4 days in some fashion, and the version that I'm putting up now looked different yesterday, just to give you a feel for it. But what I wanted to do is sort of do, pardon? Oh, volume? For the house audio? Okay. I am using a mic. Let me move it closer. Okay, is that any better? Okay. So the version that I'm showing today that you're all poring over the piece of paper is actually looks different than what it did yesterday. But what I wanted to do is put something out that I thought was mature enough to really solicit wide feedback. The other versions that are floating around, this is dated, so if you see an old version, you know, just kind of ignore it and start looking at this one, unless you see something you like. So Christine Sorenson is the current chair of the Manoa Faculty Senate Executive Committee, and every month she provides testimony to the Board of Regents. And I particularly liked this quote from her that everybody knows something has to be done, but this is where the hard part comes, trying to reach agreement about what it is. So this is my attempt to think about what are the issues that one is trying to address. And there's a lot of messiness. I guess what I'll say is when I came into the job as interim chancellor, for about the first 2 or 3 months, I think those of you who have official state of Hawaii UH vacation time are familiar with our online leave system. And I would get leave requests for people that I didn't know who they were, who it turns out report to the Chancellor of UH Manoa. And then I had to go figure out who is this person and what do they do, because there has been an accumulation of offices that we are good at adding things when we need a new function. And so one of the subtexts here was trying to rationalize some of the things that have grown up across many offices over the roughly 15 or so years that the current Manoa campus structure has been evolving. But the biggest things were really the things I talked about last April for those of you who were at the campus forum, where I was trying to focus on moving the entire campus forward. And one of the big issues, and I continue to believe this, and I know it's probably one of the matters on this chart causing the most concern among a fair number of people, is bringing together education and research. So the current structure in which we have a vice chancellor for academic affairs with most of the deans and a vice chancellor for research with some of the deans, and oh, by the way, there are also 2 deans who report directly to the chancellor, suggests that research isn't part of academic affairs. And I just do not accept that at a research university campus. And I think it's part of what makes UH Manoa so special is the faculty here in all of our units, not just our quote academic units, but also in our research units, who are amazing scholars and amazing teachers, and creating an environment in which we bring those together not as a matter of hard work, but as a matter of practice is so important. And when we talk about academic affairs, to me, we need to be talking about education and research. And if we aren't doing that, then we aren't living up to our role as Hawaii's research university. So that's kind of a big chunk of this, is the establishment of a provost position. Most research universities have a provost. I think you can find a couple that don't, but they're few and far between. And the provost is the person who is recognized as the chief academic officer for the university. Not just the chief education officer, but the chief academic officer. So the chart tries to make that real, and it also pulls in enrollment management, which again has been a major focus for the campus. We have slowed 5 years of decline. So when I reported to you in April, we had 5 consecutive years of increasing decline in enrollment. I was hoping to get back to flat for this fall. We did not make it, but we at least have stopped the acceleration of the decline in enrollment. And we're getting some better ideas about what's going on and some better metrics. We did have a very, I think our second largest entering freshman class, but I met with the bond rating agencies over the past 2 days, and it turns out that the great work that the campus has been doing on graduating students more quickly and the doubling of our 4-year graduation rate and the national award we got just last month from APLU, that's bad finances for the university. The longer we can keep them around paying us tuition, the better for our bottom line, but that's not what we're here for, and it's not good for students. So that's part of our struggle, but I will also say we have had more of a decline in graduate enrollment than undergraduate enrollment if you start digging into the numbers. So that's what we're trying to look forward to in that area. And that is also part of the responsibility of the chief academic officer, is to look after our enrollment across all aspects of our mission, graduate and undergraduate. So some people have asked, what does that mean for the chancellor if the provost has all of that? So the chancellor, and in most universities where there is a provost, the chancellor has a stronger external focus for the campus. That means engaging with the community. That means getting involved in fundraising. And you'll see on the chart, there are also a number of high-profile activities that remain directly reporting to the chancellor in this version. That includes administration and finance and campus services. That includes intercollegiate athletics, which I can assure you I have learned does take a fair amount of a chancellor's time. That includes, in this version of the chart, student life. So the things we do to ensure that we provide our students with a high quality life. There's a bunch of seats down here if you want to wander down. And that also includes a new construct that you'll see on this, which has yet to be named. But among the offices that currently report to the chancellor, there is Title IX has a direct line, gender equity has a direct line, civil rights has a direct line as independent offices. And I think all of you know that in the current environment, actually even before the current environment, that's a euphemism for post-election, there have been an increasing number of concerns around matters of diversity and free speech, and many of those have turned into issues around conflict. There have been a lot of requests for the establishment of an Ombuds office for the campus, and the notion here is that establishing an environment in which we learn to be better at respecting diversity, managing free speech issues. Fortunately, we're far enough away that we haven't had the Richard Spencers asked to come here. But it certainly could happen, and we can't pretend that we're immune either. That we need to be prepared to address those. And we have had our own challenges, none as large or as violent as what's happened at other places. but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking about it. And I will say that I think many of you are aware we established a task force, and I'm grateful Punihei Leip and Amrita are co-chairing that, and we've got representation from students and faculty and administrators around campus to begin to get a grip on it. But it's something that I think has to be part of our ongoing campus climate. And these aren't just programs for students. These have to be programs for students, faculty, and staff so that we're all learning to respect and appreciate each other and to learn how to disagree with each other firmly, but in a non-hostile manner. And the more we can do that, I absolutely believe that we can reduce the litigiousness of the campus around matters of formal grievances if we can create a capacity to do intake of issues and problems before they escalate all the way up to formal grievances or even lawsuits. So that's sort of what that box is about. I was asked by someone, how can that be as important as research or education or other matters? And what I'd say is, historically, it's been so important that we so far have 3 different offices that report directly to the Chancellor to do these things. So this is really about trying to pull some of those together, again, for the entire campus community. There is a proposal to, and I've thought about how to engage in governance, and this is something the SEC has talked about, and the creation of a Chancellor's Cabinet to pull the right people together. And that would include meeting regularly with, including the Faculty Senate Chair, the ASUH Chair, the GSO Chair, Kuali'i Council, to ensure that the actual leadership of the campus, not just the Chancellor, is meeting regularly with those campus constituencies. And one of the things this proposes is reconnecting research and graduate education. As many of you know, we used to have a Vice Chancellor for Research and Graduate Education. About 5 years ago, those were separated. Graduate education moved over to academic affairs. And this straw man recommends putting it back. That's a matter of some measure. So far, more people think it's a good idea to put it back, but by no means does everybody think it's a good idea. So let me put it up, and I know you have it, and I'm guessing once I finish chatting a bit, there would be substantial questions and comments, which is really what I'm interested in. But you can sort of see the Chancellor remains with a Chancellor's office and a set of governance group around it. The direct reports are the Provost, and I'll come back to that, a Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, for Finance and Operations, this new campus climate, diversity, and conflict resolution capability, and intercollegiate athletics. And then a dotted line, which in practice is how it works, to the Vice President for Administration. As many of you know, there was a reorganization earlier this year in which construction and facilities at the system and Manoa level were consolidated under the Vice President for Administration. This recognizes that by establishing a dotted line or a so-called dual report from the Chancellor to the Vice President for Administration to make it clear. And in fact, this is what happens in practice. The Vice President for Administration meets weekly with the Chancellor and the Vice Chancellors, but this makes it clear that the Chancellor is still responsible for the direction and planning of the Manoa campus. And one of the small print items in that box, staffing the Chancellor, is an expert on campus design who would help with planning and the connection to the academic mission of the campus as well. Under the Provost, then, there's an office with responsibility for the full academic budget, so that has to be staffed. All of the deans and directors of the academic units that currently have the 3 different reporting lines would report to the Provost in this model. There's also a Vice Provost for Academic Affairs who has most of the academic affairs functions that you would see today. In this model, the international programs that are basically connected directly into the academic programs, deans and directors, so that would be the international agreements, study abroad would be part of the academic affairs. I believe it was like that once before. And this is where we also have things like strategic planning, accreditation, and then there's also an academic personnel box as there is today. In this version, academic personnel is linked with functions like not just tenure and promotion, but also periodic review, and then there's a linkage also to faculty development, which is the notion that if the periodic review has suggestions and if there needs to be a performance improvement plan, the university should be providing the support for those faculty to actually help them develop. But we would also draw on the capacity of existing faculty in that. In this model, there's a vice provost for research and graduate education, so again, pulling those two together. This is essentially the chief research officer for the campus. This person, like the other vice provosts, would be part of the chancellor's cabinet, meeting weekly together, the vice provosts, the provost, and the vice chancellor with the vice president for administration. So that's about 8 people, pretty reasonable number. This person would get up every day and think about how do we advance the research mission across all of the academic units, the ORUs, the colleges, and everything else. This person at this point would have responsibility for the Office of Graduate Education, which would be part of the academic, the purview of the Chief Academic Officer, the Provost. And this person would also be responsible for the research programs such as Undergraduate Research Initiative, and again would be part of the same purview of the Chief Academic Officer, along with all of the deans and directors who have responsibility for students and faculty. And finally, this version moves enrollment management there, connecting it more closely to the colleges and schools, again, where the students live and the retention programs, rather than thinking of it as part of the student life environment. It becomes part of the enrollment program. Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, or in some versions it's been Student Life, has what I would call the non-enrollment management programs remain there. So that's around the Dean of Students functions, Campus Center, Student Life, student residential life in our dorms, those kinds of things, extracurricular activities, as well as, at this point, health services and mental services. But I would note that's counseling and guidance center. But I would note that these are services for the entire campus, not just for students. And we need to articulate that and continue to articulate that pretty clearly. The Vice Chancellor for Finance and Administration has many of the same functions as today. I will note a focus on shared administrative service centers. So that's the idea of beginning to pull together some of the resources, especially so that the small colleges, which have very little capacity in terms of fiscal office, personnel office, could be supported by a shared center that would have more expertise and capacity than we see today in some of the units. And we also have campus analytics. Right now, the campus does not agree on data. We get data from multiple sources, and we need to come to one set of data that is consistent across the campus, and also so with the University of Hawaii system. That's important externally, but it's also important internally as we continue to use data to drive decision making, such as in the new tuition allocation model, phase 1 of which just went into effect this year. The campus climate, diversity, and conflict resolution I talked about. There's a lot of work to be done to figure out what this would look like. Some of the diversity programs need to come together as we look at diversity, not for students and not for faculty separately, but together as a campus, and how we become more inclusive across all of the underrepresented and sometimes marginalized groups. that make up part of who we are as the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And then finally, again, intercollegiate athletics. So that's where we are now. Let me say a little bit about, and I call it a straw man, because as I mentioned, there's nothing locked in. That's the purpose of this presentation, is to get feedback on this particular version, what people like, what people don't like, what other ideas people may have. This is not tied to the college level discussions that I know many of you are, if you're in one of these colleges, those are active and ongoing right now. Whatever happens with those schools, they would be in that box reporting to the provost. We have a couple of new institutes coming up, one in sustainability and resilience, one in data analytics or informatics, still figuring out what to call it. Those would also report to the provost in the model. Those would be a new animal that we're working at to break down disciplinary boundaries for both research and education and some key strategic areas for the campus, again, per the conversations we had last spring. It's not about whether or not we have ORUs or our faculty or RTRF. Those conversations may or may not proceed apace, but this chart accommodates the world as it is today. This is not changing the tuition allocation model, although today, actually, I asked a small new budget committee to come together to continue the work. We did phase 1, but we need to push on with a phase 2 of that. And this is not intended to reopen the conversations about President, Chancellor, the system reorg that was all hashed over the year or two. I will just say right now, the University of Hawaii has 2 separate positions for the President of the University of Hawaii system, Chancellor of the UH Manoa campus. I probably know better than anyone on the planet right now that these are 2 separate jobs, and they are both more than enough for any one person to handle, certainly for this one person to handle. And it is my intention to recommend going back and separating, keeping them separate with 2 people filling 2 jobs, not one person filling 2 jobs. So this is what I'm about right now, is listening to people, listening. There's a lot of emotion. I certainly understand that, and I've been through a lot of reorganizations in my time here, and I want to respect and hear the emotion, and I also want to listen to the ideas that may underlie this or any other set of changes, and consider what the next versions will look like. For each of those areas, and certainly anything at the vice provost level, the boxes that you see truly are conceptual. They are not set in stone in any way, not that any of this is. But I do think putting working groups together around each of these areas is going to be a way to work through certainly a large number of the details that you see in those boxes will not make sense to at least some people. And so figuring out how to refine those boxes with people who are much closer to the work, for example, around diversity and conflict resolution, around our large suite of retention programs across the university. We need to look at how to assemble that in a sensible way moving forward. And I think I purposely made this big so that people could think big, and there really are no boundaries around this as a concept for thinking about how to organize really the Manoa Chancellor's Office and the Vice Chancellor's Office. That's what this is focused on, not the school and level reorganizations, not the system Manoa level reorganizations. And then continue to iterate. We do have clear policies about how to go about a reorganization. Nothing is intended to bypass those policies. Rather, this process, and actually I met with CAB, the committee, the Faculty Senate Committee on Administration and Budget, I think about a year or so ago, and I was encouraged to bring ideas early rather than rely solely on the formal process. The formal process involves a god-awful number of pages of paper, checklists, and things like that. And so this informal approach is really intended to encourage and inspire conversation about how we want this to look prior to developing a formal reorganization proposal. And not that there aren't or can't be changes after that, but it's a lot harder and people tend to get more set in their ways as all of the details are laid out. So that's the purpose of doing this in an informal fashion early before going into the formal process. So let me just put that back up and absorb the slings and arrows. Anybody? Yeah, David. Sure. Yeah, there's 2 mics up in front.
So I wanted to ask, is this on? Yeah. So I wanted to ask why facilities is at the vice president level. Why are there any other system units that have facilities controlled by vice president for administration besides Manoa? Why should it be there?
I'm not going to revisit the system Manoa organization that was agreed on and improved last year. That's not what this is about.
I have one about this.
Okay, thank you. Please, Dushko.
So when I...
For fun, if you want to identify yourself and your department.
Yeah. So when I try to imagine how this organization tree would behave in the wind, there are these...
In the wind?
In the wind, yes, it's a tree.
Okay.
There are these two crucial branches, the Provost and the Vice Chancellor of Finance and Administration, which are kind of quite separate, and it looks like that these two people would be talking to each other all the time. You're not giving me enough money, I need more money, I don't have enough money.
Is that right?
Now, could you talk to the distance between these two roles?
What would be the distance?
Well, I mean, they're kind of separate. And what is the rationale to separate? They're communicating only through Chancellor, and in a sense, every task that the Provost may have depends on Vice Chancellor, on Finance and Administration.
Actually, there's a surprising number of things that don't involve money that are hard and important. So I absolutely wouldn't agree that everything has to go that way, but many things do.
But is it good to separate them?
So the notion here is that a portion of the budget would be allocated for the academic side of the house, and that would be fully controlled by the provost. So the decision about how much goes to student affairs or athletics would be Chancellor, Provost, Vice Chancellor for Finance. But if this is about shifting money between computer science and engineering, that's purely the purview of the Provost. That would not have to go back to the Vice Chancellor for Finance and Administration. So, yeah.
Jim Fletcher, so RTRF would go from the Chancellor and skip the Provost and down to the Vice Provost?
Yes, actually, yeah, so the Vice Provost is the Chief Research Officer. So the Vice Provost for Research would control the RTRF distribution in this model. I mean, I guess the way you could think about it is right now the Vice Chancellor for Research controls it. So if the Chancellor wanted to weigh in with a suggestion, presumably the Vice Chancellor for Research would pay attention. And I would think that there would be conversations similarly between the Provost and the Vice Provost for Research. But the Vice Provost for Research would have that responsibility.
And there would be no change to the allocations to the units?
That is not part of this whatsoever. Talk about the third rail. Yeah. David?
David Rossmath. When we went through this 16 or so years ago, we did it really quickly, right? Because we had to come up with a structure for Manoa quickly, and there are people in this room who might remember this better than I do, but I was in one of the rooms anyway. And we decided to pretty much follow the structure that we had as a joint system, just because we had to do something and it seemed a reasonable thing to do. One thing we didn't imagine at the time was that the parallel offices might interfere with each other, and in particular, some of the offices in Manoa would not have as much autonomy as they would have expected to, and we would have expected to as an independent campus. And in particular, now with some of these offices being lowered in the org chart, so for example, what is currently the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs becoming the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, that somehow seems to keep what has been a surprisingly powerful Vice Presidency for Academic Affairs, powerful in the sense of having influence over Manoa affairs, in some sense having more authority ultimately over such things. And that seems to be true sort of along the line. And I'm wondering what the future idea is as far as the relative authority of Manoa and these offices over Manoa affairs. Will now their decision-making have to go through another level before they can get themselves heard by the authorities that they...
So I would emphasize that the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs position is more analogously the Provost. So in a sense, that position is elevated in stature, and it has full responsibility and authority exactly as today. So I'll just say once again, this is nothing to do with System Manoa. This is about the Manoa internal organization. So that provost is the chief academic officer for the campus, just as the VCA is now. I would say it would have perhaps slightly more stature because all academic programs would report directly to it, whereas now some of the programs that reside in ORUs or other deans that report to other than the VCAA at present, the provost actually would have the authority regarding all academic programs, which is not the case for anyone today, other than the chancellor indirectly. Okay, I didn't quite answer, but oh well. Yeah.
Brian Powell, SEC, Department of Oceanography. David, we've chatted about this, but you keep saying you don't want to open up the relationship with system, but I understand where you're coming from. In an idealized sense, it makes sense, but unfortunately the rubber has to meet the road. And so this chancellor level, they're in charge of communications, fundraising, the outreach, but they don't have a communications office, they don't have a fundraising office, they don't have in charge of their own facilities, and they don't have HR. And so that's where this disconnect between not wanting to reopen that, but then having this model. So the chancellor is, my fear is that the chancellor becomes sort of a titular figurehead because they don't actually control the things they're supposed to be doing because those are all exist in the system. So I understand your concept very well, but I don't understand how it's going to come together where we have those duplicate facilities.
So that's fine now because you're both.
Pardon?
It works fine now because you're both chancellor and president. What happens when the person is not the president?
So that is those functions that you have just addressed are in the Vice President for Administration. Let me say again, the Vice President for Administration in this version, the current working model, which is the Vice President for Administration, is part of the Manoa Cabinet, meets weekly with the Vice Chancellors and the Chancellor. That would continue, and that's what the dotted line instantiates. The dotted line, that's what that means.
If they fire them, that means they have responsibility. they get fired. Then
David, okay, thank you. Your input has been noted. Yeah, please, there and then there.
Hi, so my name is Eugene Lau. I'm an undergraduate in... Hi. Hello.
Hey.
Hi, my name is Eugene Lau. I'm an undergraduate in the ICS department, and I have 2 questions actually. My first one is I don't see the Office of Undergraduate Education on this reorganization, and so my first question would be, what will become of the Office of Undergraduate Education?
So that's one of the boxes under the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs. It isn't by name. There were actually too many offices under the current VCAA for me to have fit them all on there. So when I talk about the details, so you don't see honors program, you don't see Office of Undergraduate Education, you don't see learning communities, you don't see the Athletic Advising Center, et cetera. There's a whole bunch, but it's aggregated in that grouping under the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs.
Okay, thank you. And my second question was, what implications do you believe this proposed reorganization will have on undergraduate education?
I believe the most important impact will probably be the integration of, deeper integration of research into undergraduate education by pulling that which is distinctive about UH Manoa as a research university and pulling it closer to the educational mission as captured in all of the academic deans and directors and what is now the purview of the current VCAA. So I think not that we aren't already doing a lot, but I think we can do even more, and it'll be more natural when we bring together education and research in this fashion under a provost.
Thank you.
Oh, I think I had one over here and then maybe one back there. Sandy, I think right next to you, Sandy. Yeah, yeah.
Hi, I'm Shauna Brown. I'm chair of the history department. I had a very similar question, kind of a follow-up. Maybe was there another example or kind of a case study from the level of the instructional units to kind of help us understand how this will improve our mission in terms of our scholarship, in terms of our instructional mission, et cetera? Thanks.
Probably the most, I'd almost answer it in the same way that, you know, as it directly relates to your instruction, if you're in one of the arts and sciences, you'll be, you know, using the tree analogy, you'll be closer to the office charged with advancing scholarship across. So when we talk about research and scholarship, it isn't just the sciences. And in a conversation with the deans this morning, this came up. It's across all aspects. And the VCR now is charged with advancing scholarship across all disciplines. This will bring those a little bit closer. Other than that, I think the connection to enrollment management may be useful. We're looking a little bit at, and I don't know if your department awards financial aid, but being more strategic about financial aid and the pockets of money that are awarded by, right now, the financial aid office in student affairs, the foundation, the college and the department scholarships, and then there are also scholarships awarded out of academic affairs. So that process, to the extent it touches some of the faculty, that should be smooth and be more strategic for your students. I should say, you know, one of the deans a couple meetings ago sort of looked at this in a long conversation, and you know, many people are very passionate about every aspect of this. And this dean pretty much said, you guys do whatever you want with that stuff. That isn't what affects me. What affects me is my faculty and my students and how I work with my fellow deans. So all of this is not about, you know, there's a lot of this that is about making us more effective at that level too.
Hi. Pat Steinhoff, Chair of Sociology. My question is, how many additional administrative positions does this reorganization produce, and why is that justifiable?
0. It wouldn't be. So I just did the math before this. This has come up a couple times. But the number of vice provosts, provost, and vice chancellors on this chart appears to be about the same, and if not, it will have to end up there as the number of vice chancellors, associate vice chancellors, and assistant vice chancellors today. That will be a design goal for this, for sure.
Nicholas Schneider from Oceanography. As you know, this campus has a very active research component that's extramurally funded. And currently, the research reports to the Chancellor directly via the Vice Chancellor for research. As you know, the funding climate, particularly on the federal level, is uncertain, and the whole funding climate is in flux with more private funding coming online. The question is, how does this effective downgrading of research from the Vice Chancellor to Vice Provost level, how does this help the UH Manoa campus to retain and grow its research enterprise?
So first I would disagree with your statement that, so Oceanography, using it as an example, part of SOEST, right? So SOEST currently reports to the Vice Chancellor for Research, who reports to the Chancellor. Under this model, SOEST would report to the Provost, who reports to the Chancellor. So there's no degradation, so to speak, of reporting line whatsoever. Rather, what happens is that the units themselves have that same reporting line for those ORUs that report to the VCR. It's hard to foresee what will happen with federal funding, certainly, and I guess everybody saw my note this morning about the tax bill, and I feel pretty much the same way about the budget, other than that so far the bad things we worried about with the federal budget, most of them have not happened yet. What I would say is that the integration of research and education will be the key. So if the money is not going to come in from the federal government, certainly as a strategy we are looking more to philanthropy and identifying private sources of support for research. But I would also say the integration with education will be key. So having our talented researchers more engaged in teaching is likely to help us in figuring out how to finance our faculty who are great researchers and can teach. There's no magic bullet though. If, you know, right now our number is close to $300 million a year. If 100 million of that goes away, there's no amount of reorganizing that's going to make that money appear from somewhere else. But everybody will have to be working on how we manage that. And it won't just be us, it'll be going on around the country as well.
Ruth Bingham, advising. This is interesting, thank you. Just a quick question. It seems from the chart that the advising and retention is separate from the deans, the academic units, their advising units that graduate the students. So does that, do you see that, is that accurate?
This chart, when it says advising, it refers to the current advising function that is in the VCAA office.
Oh, so just the undecided?
I would welcome conversation about how to do that. I think there are opportunities to improve advising for our students across this campus, but this is not at that level of detail yet. And I know this is an area where you work. What do you think?
I think it would be really good to be able to coordinate all of the advising on campus because it's really split and it's difficult to keep it coherent.
That's my intuition, but
I think it would be great to do.
If we can get a group together and that's a consensus, I know sort of in the spirit of the other question, it seems like we just made the decision, it was before I got here, to sort of distribute advising out and about, and I haven't been part of the conversation of why that decision was made and whether it has helped, but I do worry a lot about whether we're giving consistent, accurate, and helpful advising to students. And I've seen a couple incidents that have crossed my desk over the past couple of weeks to suggest that whether it's centralizing or coordinating with standards, it would probably help students a lot. But this doesn't get to that, I guess, to answer your question. And I would love if there's a group of people who could lead that. Yeah.
Hi, David.
Hey.
Marguerite Butler from Biology. I have two questions. I wonder if you wouldn't mind, just because it's on everyone's mind, if you could address, with regard to the federal budget and graduate students, why can't we just reclassify what their tuition whatever is called so that they would not be subject to taxation on those kinds of amounts? And then the second question was, did you consider combining student services under the provost, because a lot of student services functions are geared towards student success, and it would seem as though they would really benefit from talking to other members of the academic team, you know, to better coordinate.
So your second question, I'll answer first. Yes, yesterday it looked that way. So I think it's an open question. I presented the model in both ways, and you know, it's something I would be very interested in getting an understanding of what would work better. But I think it's a very fair question, and some universities have it that way, and some have it a different way, more like this. The second thing, your first question, yeah. So we're trying to understand how we will address it. And was there a vote today? I haven't seen my email for a while. Not yet.
But they have the votes.
Well, they say they have the vote. Anyway, so assuming that graduate assistant tuition waivers become taxable, we will be, you know, it will impact every university in the country. So I think a whole bunch of people will be putting their heads together. You know, there are a couple ways to deal with it if there's a gimmick so that we can make it go away. That would be great, but it'll depend how the law is written very specifically. But it looks like the people who have looked at the language believe that anything that we call a waiver, we're going to have to figure out how to calculate a value and then declare it as income to the students. If, you know, one idea is to plus up the actual salary so that it covers both the taxability of the tuition increase as well as the salary. I'll just say the reason that costs money. I mean, so in that sense, it's money that right now other parts of that bill become challenging to the institution as well. So I told the deans this morning, our system CFO is hustling to sell bonds next week before any new bond provisions of the tax law go into effect that will negatively impact the rates that are available to us. Because if that hits January 1, we'll have to pay more to borrow money. In this case, we're refinancing old debt to reduce costs. So I'm not exactly sure what solution will work. I think that there will be smart people across higher education trying to figure it out, so we will definitely not be alone. But you know, clearly the tax law was not designed to support American higher education or the attainment of students across all of the provisions of it. It's you know, either an attack or intentional or unintentional, but one way or the other. I saw those of you who follow the Chronicle of Higher Ed. This is not a partisan matter. Margaret Spellings, who was the Republican Secretary of Education under George Bush, who is now the president of University of North Carolina, just wrote an op-ed about the many ways in which this tax bill is harmful to American higher education. So it's every association is on with it.
Hi, I just had a quick question in regards to some of what you're saying regarding seed.
Sorry, can't hear.
Can you hear me better without the mic?
Yeah. Okay.
I just had a quick question regarding some of what you're saying earlier in regards to diversity, seed, student affairs. Part of me is also wondering, how are you defining diversity?
I can't.
Part of me is wondering, how are you defining diversity, sir? But the other part is also asking, how do you envision seed and other underrepresented groups better serving students and faculty under the campus climate umbrella versus its current iteration?
So that's a good question, and I know this, I mean, I'll just say this again is intended to stimulate discussion. Some of the, seed is it's a great set of programs that all live under one umbrella, focused on students. And I'm trying to understand the extent, if they're focused on just student success, that's one thing. When they're more nurturing and supportive of advancing the culture, that actually crosses students, faculty, and staff. So some of putting out something like this is to encourage the conversation, putting it out as a straw man. So I don't have the answer, but I do know that when we look at matters, as just one example, we moved Native Hawaiian student success from student affairs into Hawaii Nui Akea. And that appears to have been fairly successful, but it's still physically located inside the center. So, there are different ways to organize it, both organizationally and physically. But I think if we can keep in mind that we're committed both to student success and diversity and inclusion across students, faculty, and staff, that's probably a way to think about it. But it's a challenge sometimes to think about how do we staff that appropriately. So I welcome your ideas.
Aloha mai kākou.
Aloha.
Lili kalaka me Elehiva from Kamakakua Kalani. David, I really like the idea of refining the job description for Chancellor to fundraising and working with different members of the community, because we're going to see a lot of fiscal challenges in the next few years. And so I think the more that you work on that or bring that out, I think the more of us who are faculty are going to think, well, that's a good idea. So I just want to kako that. I really, really like the idea that there's not going to be, there will be 0 additional FTE to this plan, because we're all looking for FTE in the departments, and so that's going to be kind of a challenge. And I think I really like that you've come out to talk story with all of us and get ideas going. So just I wanted to throw that out there. I think there's a lot of people in Hawaii who have a lot of money and who want to support good things, and we need a champion who does that all the time, like 24/7. So if that's a job description that you see for whoever will be Chancellor, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, one of the deans this morning also said the Chancellor can't be a doofus, to quote him. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, good input.
Mr. President, my name is Tina Tawasosi. I'm with the Office of Multicultural Student Services. My question is, because it's not shown on this form, who are the makers of this straw man?
Me.
Was there a midwife? Was there other voices in the making of the straw man, or is it just one man band?
It comes from conversations, so I take responsibility. And your office is one of many that is not shown specifically by name. But it arises from conversations with the vice chancellors, the deans, the Senate Executive Committee, and others who have seen copies of it and just provided direct feedback to me at various times. So I would welcome your feedback and your colleagues as well.
Okay, the second question is, I'm glad that you mentioned, because when I saw this yesterday, there was no mention of SEED. So I'm glad that it's on this form now. But I think the senior staff at SEED will probably talk with you, because we're doing more than campus, climate, diversity, and conflict resolution. We do a lot of retention, recruitment, student success is on the other side of this straw man. So hopefully that will be discussed later on.
I've heard that now 3 times in the last hour, so no, thank you. I mean, in a positive way. Thank you for sharing that.
My name's Robert Wright, I'm in Sorenson. So I have a question about metrics and outcomes.
Okay, good.
I have a question about metrics and outcomes. So if as an R1 university we're a place of discovery, we generate knowledge, we disseminate the knowledge, we instruct young minds, and we serve the community. The first sentence indicates that we're not doing that well, or we're not doing it well enough, and there's some you can't. Speak louder. Okay. So the first sentence indicates that we're not doing that well enough, or there's quantifiable capacity for us to do it better. We're shuffling some boxes around and putting words in boxes which might go better together in one box than 2 boxes. How will we know that this has worked? And can those outcomes of generating more knowledge, discovery, training, community service not be done within the current structure?
Wow. So it's, we have metrics around student outcomes. We have metrics around research dollars, certainly. That's the easy one on research. We have numbers around enrollment, so I'll just give you, not to put too fine a point on it. Could we do better? I would like us to be competitive for the best students from Hawaii who think that coming to UH Manoa is a place where they're going to get a great undergraduate education. And I think this kind of a change, and obviously it's a work in progress today, is the kind of thing that can help link our fabulous faculty who are engaged in world-class research to undergraduate education much more tightly. And I think if we start drawing in more of the best students from Hawaii, we will change the way faculty and students and the community feels about us even more positively than we do today. So the numbers we can look at are research dollars, student satisfaction at the time they graduate. There's a bunch of things we can do. It will be hard. Your scientist is this is sort of a Big Bang approach. So let's just say everything is up 10%. How will we know what did it out of all of the changes we made? But I do. I absolutely do.
5, 10.
Oh, how much? I don't know. It's a fair question. No, that's a good, thank you. It's a great question. Yeah. Okay, I think just a couple more.
Okay, David, thank you for coming to share with us your ideas for the reorganization. I'm Judith Inazu from the Social Science Research Institute. Can you all hear me? Okay, thank you. I have a question about this box at the very bottom of the Vice Chancellor for Finance and Admin, and it's called the Shared Admin Service Centers. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, and more specifically, whether that shared services will just cut across the admin units in the Manoa reorg, or will it also interface with the admin units in the schools and colleges?
So Kathy, this is Kathy's idea for how many years? we want to pilot it with the Chancellor's office and the Vice Chancellor's offices. So in computer science land, we talk about eating our own dog food. So this is the eat our own dog food that we will try to pool the admin resources that are currently across that. This was proposed as part of the Raleigh report on research, whatever, 2000-ish? 2000-ish as well, to try to provide more efficient and effective services for the campus. Some people have a great HR person, some people have a great fiscal person, some people have a great operations person, and lots of people don't have great all three available to them. And so I would love to figure out a way to have everybody have access to great services, and that probably can't be done if every operating unit has to grow all their own, especially smaller units. So that's the concept, and it's intentionally vague, but it starts with the Chancellor's office trying to make that work. Okay.
Hi, David. Oh,
last one.
Someone
okay, two more. That's it. Yeah.
Oh, am I going?
Yeah.
Okay. Bonnie Jean Manini, Student Life and
Hey, Bonnie
Development.
Jean.
I actually have a question about the process. I think it's really great that you're here today, but being that this is the 8th version potentially of this draft, I'm wondering if we're going to have continued opportunities to provide input across the additional drafts that come out after this. And also, if you could address, I saw today that there's an opportunity for us to submit input in writing, and I've already submitted one comment, but I obviously will have many, many more comments, as you know me well.
I do. You also have my email address.
Yes,
you can
I do
even
have
send
your email
directly.
addresses.
You don't
Everyone
have
has
to go through
access
the
to
form.
that. But I wanna know probably what is the best way to provide input, and then how best to provide input on an ongoing basis. Will additional drafts be released publicly so we can look at it?
So,
I'm assuming you won't be meeting with us monthly, so what would be the best way for us to move forward as additional drafts get created?
So I will want to release at least one more public that refines the boxes below I mean, may juggle them, but also refines those and get input before we go formal. I would like to keep this moving. So probably that would take place, this is December 1, so ideally by the end of January. There would be something more refined. Might leak into February just because of the, difficulty of getting working groups together. That's kind of the time frame. And we'll do a posting in either another event like this or just do a, posting online to solicit comments online.
So if we get written input in by the end of the year, we're good?
Oh yeah, you'll definitely be in the next version.
All right.
Assuming.
You like.
Thank you. Okay, is there one more or no? Thank you very much. I think there's somebody in here for 2:30. I appreciate it. There's an online form, or I'm pretty easy to find my email, and I do read all my own email, even if I don't reply to everything, but I do reply to Bonnie Jean. Thank you, everybody.